and in some case, it can even ask new reviewer to come with some fresh eyes to review the process. So now I just want to move into how to review a manuscript. I don't know if there's any question on just on that first part of the presentation. It's pretty straightforward, but maybe something was not clear. All right. I showed that first cartoon where you were just slammed by people with their bats and sword and all this stuff. But actually, I like the review process. I think it's a very important process in science. It is something that is used to maintain our standards and the credibility of our work. In that process, actually, one of the aims is not only to slam you, but it's also to improve your manuscript, improve the work that you're trying to publish. I feel actually it's a privilege to be a reviewer. Some people just hate it. It's more work. Yeah, it's true, it's more work, but at the same time, you get to witness science before all the readers of the journal. So you are here on the front line. You do that out of your goodwill, so typically you don't get paid for that. Some journals give you free submissions, or there are some systems where you have retribution, but most of the time it's out of goodwill. And I think I like it that way. It's a privilege, but there's a lot of responsibility when you become a reviewer. You have to ensure fairness in the process, so you want to be critical towards the authors, but also you have to sort of like take into account these are typically people that may have been working 3, 4 years, 5 years on that story. So you just don't want to slam the door on them. You want to come with critique, but something that is constructive. So you have to be fair, but you also have to be a guarantor of what's going to be published. You want to make sure that what the journal is going to be publishing is of good quality. And you also become a fact checker just to make sure that the manuscript is being properly packed. So what you get as a reviewer, you get the manuscript with the figures, you get all the supplementary data, you get sometimes some additional guideline by the journal. I typically don't read them. And sometimes you get some additional information by the journal, like all the other paper that might be related to that published manuscript, the submitted manuscript. You don't see the cover letter typically. It's confidential for the editor. And so what you need to give back in return is to provide these reviewer comments. Typically also you have to provide additional online informations where you have to score the manuscript or give specific recommendation like accept with major, revision with minor revision, or reject, that sort of things. And you can also provide confidential comments to the editors. You don't have to, but if you feel that you want to say something more, but you are afraid that by saying it, this will disclose your identity to the author, you can actually have these confidential comments to the editor, but you don't have to. And I rarely use that, but there might be situations where it might be wise to use that. So my approach. So as I mentioned, there is no universal methods to review a paper. So I just want to sort of like say how I do it, but it doesn't mean that this is the way it has to be done. So the way I do it is that I just read through the manuscript and the figures. I do a serious reading, but not a careful reading. Okay, and I take a few notes, but I just read it through. I try to go it from A to Z as fast as possible, and then I think about it. I can spend an hour, or I just let it sit there for like 1 or 2 days, where I just let the process come in my mind. Every time I have free time in the showers, in the bus, or whatever, I'll think about the manuscript, and already there at that point will take a decision whether or not that manuscript should be published in that journal. This is not my final decision, but it's just something now I will use for my second reading. And then so then I come back to the manuscript, and then I do a very careful reading of the manuscript from A to Z, and then I really go into all the supplementary figures, all the supplementary tables. I really dissect the paper carefully. And in that process, I take note of all the possible errors, the flaws, and all my comments, critique, and so on. And after that, when I've done that, I start to write my report. Before that, sometime I also read other papers in the field because sometimes I'm not fully acquainted with it, or I can also ask colleagues for their comments. I said, like, I'm reviewing that paper where they're using these methods. I'm not really sure about it. What do you think? So you have to be careful because all this information is confidential, but you're allowed to seek advice from colleagues. So typically, I spend a week per review, and the actual work will be typically between 2 to 10 hours and sometimes more. And that depends also where the paper is going to be sent. If it's for a small journal and so on, I typically only spend maybe 2 or 3 hours because the paper tends to be also a bit shorter. But if I have to review a paper if I think it's an important paper, if the paper is heavy, it has a lot of data, the process can take really a lot of time. And so what you need to look when you're reviewing a paper is you need to look at the accuracy of the work. Have these author include all the control in the experiment. You want to make sure that the interpretation of the data is sound. First of all, do you agree? You look at the gel, they say, oh, there is an increase phosphorylation. Do you actually see an increased phosphorylation? And then, so that's sort of like a first degree. And then also then they can derive conclusion, say, well, that means that the phosphorylation of that protein activates the pathway. And then you have to think about, does that data really mean what they're saying in the manuscript? So that's more like a second degree sort of like interpretation of their data. You have to consider the uniqueness of the work, and that is true for any journal where you're sending it. Is that really unique? Have the author already published some aspect of that, or have other competitor already published the work? And then you look at the quality of the manuscript. So you want to make sure that the writing is good, that it's clear, and that you also take into account the readership of the journal, because there are some cell biology journal where, for instance, the typical reader there would not be familiar with a technical aspect of what the author have used. So you may suggest, for instance, that they simplify the manuscript so that the typical reader of that journal can understand the manuscript. And then you also looked at are all the methods described, all the figure correctly labeled, because very often in that process you'll see author refer to figure 3, and in fact it's just figure 5 or 6. Those are minor errors. You should not reject the paper for that, but you want to improve, make sure that once the paper is published, everything is somewhat accurate. So the reviewer comments. So typically, this is how I structure it, and most of the people structure it that way. So you have a first paragraph that can be short or a little bit more lengthy, where you summarize the work. You just want to show that you read the paper and you basically go through what is the main sort of like result of that paper. You should place the work in the context, okay? And that's especially true if you people that want to publish in big impact journals. You have to tell to the editor why that work is potentially important. So what do we know in the field? What are the main challenges? And whether or not that paper is actually addressing some of these key challenges. And then at the end of that, you typically express an opinion about the manuscript. You don't have to spell out, reject the paper, but you can say, like this paper could be potentially interesting, but there are too many flaws, or and so on and so on. And then you just basically give your opinion on the paper. And then you have to give specific comments. So typically you try to find 1 to 3 major points that need to be addressed, or 1 or 3 major points why the paper should not be accepted by the journal. And then you can list all the other minor points, all these sort of like small errors. If there's a small control that was missed, if you think that some additional experiment should be provided, you can also have that in the major points, but that could the minor points is of all these little details that should not be too much the reason why a paper should be accepted or rejected, what you should do to make sure that another paper looks appropriate when it's being published. So you also want to make sure you comment about all possible ambiguity in the text or in the interpretation. Sometimes also you have to correct the grammar, some typo, and label it.